When I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde a few years ago, it gave me a very clear picture of what I wanted to aspire to as a writer, given the fact that Oscar Wilde is really a master at not only storytelling, but even more specifically, portraying the madness and the sort of debauchery and the kind of arguably slave mentality, that immoral mentality is a better word, that you see in the aristocracy, which is a topic that I tackled quite a lot in my own book series. John Rowe is the figurehead, the sort of emblem of a lot of the debauchery and a lot of these things in my own book series. He's a nobleman who kidnaps this child prodigy, this famous composer Edmund. I don't have the time to get into all the details about it, but I mean, just there's various ideological differences between them, which I will get into, and also this kind of violent need to control him, feeling that Edmund is an irrepressible spirit, an irrepressible character that he feels like he has to oppress and keep away from the influence of his family. There are, however, some differences between John Rowe and the aristocrats that are portrayed in The Picture of Dorian Gray. I want to focus a little bit on the character Lord Henry, who is really the evil mentor, the influence that leads Dorian Gray astray in the story, telling him that, well, one of the interesting things that he actually points out is that, in his opinion, beauty ends, a real beauty ends where the intellectual expression begins. And that sort of opens the door to a lot of that philosophy of sensuality and self-indulgence that Dorian Gray buys into, and that's what leads him to sell his soul for eternal youth, eternal beauty. But it's also a little unclear. I get the sense that he's maybe talking about more than just physical beauty, even though that's the primary focus. I think he is incorporating the more sort of metaphysical or the kind of utopic sort of concept of beauty that we also think about, that we also talk about whenever we explore that subject. Right. So there's a couple things going on, and he also points out, and I could be wrong. I think maybe this was just in the film adaptation of the story. But at one point, Lord Henry says that, we're all just worm food after we're dead. Life is short. You just got to do what you want. You got to live it. Don't let society constrain you. Don't let God constrain you. And that's another similarity, I would say, with John Rowe. However, though, what makes John Rowe very different, I would say, is that he does not really believe in any objective idea of beauty, any objective standard of beauty. He is more like what some might call the sort of modern degenerate, even though he's living in the 12th century. Right, he even puts on a facade of the everyman, someone who's sort of insufferably average, and even, you could argue, a bit below average, sort of pathetic, that there's this sort of self-effacing quality that he has, in addition to the belief that beauty is not really ultimately a priority, and it doesn't have any objective value, and that he also doesn't really believe that there's anything after we die, and it all is packaged into this image that I'm sure that many of us are familiar with. You see it in fiction quite a lot. However, I do think one thing I was a little envious of when I read Dorian Gray is the way that Oscar Wilde really uses that kind of character, but takes it to a whole other level. I think that Lord Henry's philosophy is maybe in some ways a little more interesting than John Rowe's. Even though I would say that John Rowe does have a unique appeal because of his sort of pathetic nature that he uses often that he often uses in a manipulative way to cover up many of his darker purposes, his darker intentions. And I also think that Dorian Gray himself is interesting because he shows you that more softer and more vulnerable side, which then contrasts with his aggressive impulses that come along later on in the story, which is one of the reasons why he reminds me a lot of the character Tom Ripley. If anyone's seen The Talented Mr. Ripley, Talented Mr. Ripley was this con man who murders this man who he's envious of to take his identity, and he has a similarly vulnerable nature that makes many of his crimes seem even creepier, and there's a kind of intensity to that performance, and that's one of the things that really haunted me the most about the character Dorian Gray.